Well, hello and you're very welcome back to the AI6 podcast. Well, in this week's long listen, I'm delighted to be joined by Deputy Naoise Ó Cearúil, who is the Fianna Fáil spokesperson on artificial intelligence and also has had a long career in tech, specifically in AI. Deputy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much, Joanne. Great to be with you.
Well, listen, last week, the big news in AI focused on Ireland because we released our new AI and digital strategy. Now, it's not the first one, but it builds on previous strategies. And that's very important because it's moving so fast. But how would you sum it up for anyone who hasn't had the time to go through it like you and I?
Yeah, look, I think in short, like it's welcome, right? So we need to be ambitious. Obviously, we have a lot of the tech industry here, but what it's trying to do is show that there needs to be guardrails. So there needs to be guardrails in place. Yes, we can be as ambitious as we want, but we have to ensure that everything we do, particularly around digitalization and specifically around artificial intelligence, is done in a safe manner to protect citizens and protects obviously business as well. So no, really, really positive from my perspective. There are elements to it that I think will resonate with people, particularly in the tech industry. But as I said, at the heart of it is protecting the individual citizen and their data.
And this should come to as no surprise to anyone who's following Ireland's AI evolution, because we have an Oireachtas committee focused on AI. They had an interim report published in December, and that very much focused on Ireland leading on good governance. And they even said that the EU AI Act wasn't something to aim for. It should be a base standard. So this theme is continuing, but can we balance regulation with innovation? That's the big question.
Yeah, so you took the two words out of my mouth: innovation versus regulation, and that's what we're all struggling with when it comes to AI, right? So there are huge opportunities, particularly around efficiencies, but we have to do it in a way that protects the individual, right, and protects collective data as well. So what I actually did last July, was I drafted and I published a bill to establish a national AI office. So that would have acted as a regulator and indeed as an accelerator as well. Now in September, the government and Department of Enterprise announced that they were going to establish this office anyway, which was great to hear, and it saved me a good bit of work. But the scheme of the bill was published 2 weeks ago. So that's the AI regulation bill, which has come from obviously the EU AI Act. And it won't be a regulator. So there'll be 15 competent authorities that were assigned previously will still be those competent authorities. So I suppose from the department's perspective, from the minister's perspective, they want more red tape particularly around regulation, right? And it's that piece around not trying to stymie innovation. Now, I disagree. I think there needs to be that expert in the state when it comes to AI, particularly AI regulation. But notwithstanding, look, we'll continue on in the vein, and I'll try and make some amendments to that legislation. But that therein lies the difficulty. It's around trying to ensure that obviously big tech can innovate, but also SMEs and individuals can innovate as well. And there will be a regulatory sandbox, which I think is crucial for SMEs in particular, also for SMEs to be able to compete for governmental contracts for procurement in the future as well. Having that regulatory sandbox kind of gives the state certainty, but also gives SMEs the capacity and the capability to compete with, we'll say, bigger entities as well. And what we do have, and sorry to be jumping from the AI committee to the AI regulation bill, and then also separately to the AI and digital services strategy, as part of that AI digital services strategy as well, is the whole area of procurement, where we have seen in the past, where we'll say large state contracts, middle guys just can't compete, and even bigger Irish companies can't compete with these larger international, we'll say, procurement experts, and larger companies. But it's actually breaking it down and looking at, okay, rather than just an overall package, this is going to be a problem-solving bid, right? So we have a problem. We want you to bid on how to solve it. Here's a regulatory sandbox that you can use to test. And I think that will allow more competition for the SME sector, but it should, in my opinion, create more startups in Ireland, right? That are solutions orientated, problem solving SMEs. It could only be like, two people that were working in a tech company and say, do you know what, let's just go out on our own and see if we can compete for some business here, because there will be opportunities like this, not just in Ireland, but across the EU. So I see it as really a huge opportunity for potential startups, existing startups, and for existing SMEs as well.
And how quickly can we see this regulatory sandbox established? Now, I know that there was a public call out, almost like a pre-market horizon scanning and inviting people to submit their ideas. So I thought that was very, very interesting that came exactly at the same time as your strategy. And I went, oh, actually, they're moving pretty fast here. There's no waiting. You're already asking the market, what solutions have you got?
Yeah, so the central bank actually already have a regulatory sandbox in place. So for, we'll say, financial services, particular products or services that people are trying to establish, they should contact the central bank directly. And I don't have exact dates on the, I suppose, the official regulatory sandbox, but I would imagine, because the office needs to be formally established by August of this year, that with that will come the regulatory sandbox. Now, it might be a month or two afterwards, but I've spoken to Minister Naoise Smith about this, and there actually is an employee technically already working in the National AI Office, even though it hasn't been, I suppose, formally started yet, which will obviously happen in August. So my hope is a lot of that rave up or the pre-work will be done between now and then, so that when the office is formally established, it will be just ready to hit the ground running. And while I'm on the topic of the National AI Office, if I may, Joanne, in the scheme of the bill, the AI regulation bill, details are out about what this AI office will do. And essentially, it's going to act as a signposting office, rather than, as I said, not as a regulator, but also doesn't have powers of investigation, which I'm a bit worried about. And it also doesn't have, in my perspective, I suppose, teeth. And what I mean by that is, so say if a query or a complaint or a case comes before the National AI Office, they will direct it towards, we'll say, the Workplace Relations Commission if it's in relation to employment law. They'll direct it to the central bank if it's to do with funds or to do with finance. Now, what if something falls in between? And the AI Office basically says, the central bank, you should take it. The central bank says no. Workplace Relations Commission, right, you to take it, they say no, or both of them want it in a different circumstance. It doesn't have the authority and the ability to basically direct one in order to take it. So, like, even simple things like that, I think there's a bit of tweaking to be done to legislation. And I do think, while it isn't going to act as a regulator, I certainly think it should have the powers of investigation where complaints have been made, and to work hand in glove with the relevant regulator, be it the Data Protection Commissioner, if it was around data security, or data vulnerability, or similarly if it was in relation to the central bank, something to do with finance. I think that ability should be there, that I don't see at present, and I'll be making some suggestions to change it.
So the message is clear that business should mobilize if they have practical ideas where AI solves a problem, because that's the best way to approach the technology. I guess, historically, some businesses might complain that it's really hard to access supports, funding. There's a lot of bureaucracy, red tape. There's urgency with this too. We need to, as AI accelerates, we need to accelerate our agility. And in fact, that's in the premise of the title of the report. Will then the local enterprise offices, Enterprise Ireland, all of those business support agencies have the capability to help SMEs?
Yeah, so the local enterprise offices will be, I suppose, assisted, and they have already, some of them have already started in this already. And there will be, I suppose, additional efforts. The National AI Office will play a role here in terms of assisting with the local enterprise offices as well. And again, not to go back too much, but in the bill, I had basically it was the National AI Office is going to do all of this accelerating and all of the regulating as well, but I was probably being a little bit too ambitious. But I was trying to get ahead of, I suppose, the discussions that we're having now. So this was, I was appointed as AI spokesperson last May and drafted the bill and produced the bill in July. So look, I'm hopeful, and I'm actually quite optimistic with what is in the AI and digital strategy from last week, that there is a genuine concern, it's the wrong word, but there's a genuine ambition to do as much as possible and to help as much as possible, particularly from an SME perspective, but indeed within the public services as well.
Yeah, a lot of people are worried about their jobs, Deputy, right? They're worried about displacement, not wanting to adapt, employers linking AI adoption with promotional opportunities, and people are afraid. Is the government going to have to look at how we support staff? And, you know, I'm sure unions will have a say in all of this transformation too, on how we all move forward together, because I believe it's an all of society response. It's just not one arm of society, like, you know, let's lay it on the door of the government. So how are you thinking along those lines?
Yeah, so yesterday morning I was writing a new policy on this actually, and what I've drafted is a pilot scheme for reskilling and retraining for jobs impacted by AI. So the idea that I have at the moment is, so let's say you're working for a legal firm, you're a legal secretary, and there's a lot of legal tech out there, and your job essentially has been automated. The job of 10 legal secretaries, now only 2 need to do. So that's 8 jobs. So what I'm proposing in this policy is essentially that there would be reskilling and retraining into other areas of the business, so that you could be redeployed where there is a business need. And there would be state supports to do this. It's in the interest of the state because you don't have to pay job seekers benefit, for example, and you're keeping people in meaningful employment. And also it's in the interest of the business as well, because first of all, they don't have to lose employees, but second of all, they can be reskilled and retrained in areas where they're needed, I suppose more needed. The other element of that I'm looking at is, would say that same example, and that legal firm doesn't have any roles that would fit for those 8 employees, well, then the state would step in and reskill and retrain people in areas where there is a growing and a large demand for skills, because we're at full employment in the state. So say, for example, in the green tech sector, or it could be even simply bus drivers. We don't have enough bus drivers in the country, and some people would like to be reskilled and retrained in that area, and the state and those companies would work together in order to reskill and retrain people into industries where they're at full employment and we need people, new skills in those areas. And the example of a legal secretary, for example, a highly skilled, highly competent person would be well able to adapt into another industry. So particularly while we're at full employment, you know, there is that ability to move people between sectors and to help people, I suppose, start with a second or third degree in a different sector where they can contribute meaningfully. And the state is assisting industry, the industry is assisting the state, and at the core of this is the individual and protecting those individuals and I suppose their role in the workforce.
Now, switching to focus on government and public sector and public and civil servants, there's a big ask that they're all AI enabled and have those skills and competencies by the end of the decade, which is, you know, 4.5 short years away. You know, that's transformation in skills, but it's also transformation in culture, and it's a big ask. And as I said, people are afraid. You know, how are you going to take on that big challenge?
Yeah, so anybody who's worked on big tech implementations will shudder to the thought of 2 words: change management. But change management is something I think we do poorly in the public services, and I think it's something we're going to have to get better at and to actually understand. And anybody who's gone through any sort of large, be it moving from one provider to another, from one cloud service to another, for example. The whole thing is actually bringing people on the journey, and that it's actually user-led. And in fairness, as part of digital strategy, that includes it as part of it, that there would be the voice of the end user at its core, and that the end user in this instance are people in the public services. So I think that is the core element of it. It's when people think AI is happening to them rather than with them, there's natural pushback. Whereas if people actually are trained, relevant, not only on how to use Microsoft Teams and how to, kind of use Copilot to script an email or your responses, but actually look at, okay, well, how can this help me with my core competencies and my role? People buy into it and people get it. And that's what is envisaged here, that it's done with people rather than to people. And I think under those circumstances, anybody who has gone through different change management procedures in the past would say, okay, well, there generally is buy-in in those instances. And that's what's been maybe assumed in this case, but there is the data to back up that, that type of approach does work.
And, I think that the public service really stood to the challenge that was presented to the country and the world when COVID hit in 2020, and how they transformed how they were delivering communications and public services practically overnight. I think will stand to them. So it absolutely can be done. Now, one question I always get from reluctant adopters of AI is the environmental question. They morally and ethically believe that their use of AI is going to negatively impact the environment. And, we hear about data centers, the energy use, the water use that they require. How can you really give comfort to people that the environmental challenge is being answered in this innovation?
Yeah, so look, we can't get away from the fact that AI requires compute, right? So it needs data centers, it needs somewhere to store all of this information. If it's not being stored in Ireland, it's being stored in Finland, it's being stored in the US, it needs somewhere to live. What I will say is AI is actually helping in relation to the climate disaster as well. And I actually sit on the AI committee, but also on the Climate, Energy and Environment committee as well. So I can look at it from both lenses. One thing that is happening in Ireland is the private wires legislation. And in short, private wires allows large energy users to create their own energy on site, and in this case, renewable energy. So what I would like to see, and what we will see moving forward to this piece of legislation, it's going to pre-legislative scrutiny in the next 2 weeks, is if you have a large data center, for example, they could create their own energy on site with a wind farm or solar farm. So I do think the large energy users in the future will need to be able to demonstrate and show how they can generate their own energy on site without tapping into the grid, and how they're not having a negative impact on the environment. And the only way to really do that is through renewable energy. And the private wires legislation will allow that capacity and that capability, which hasn't been there previously. And Minister Darragh O'Brien has it as a priority that we progress this legislation this year. It's one of the things I've been pushing most since becoming a TD, because I see how it can positively help. Because the last thing we want to do is fall behind from a technological perspective, because of our fears around the overuse of data. And on the other side, we are naturally worried about the overuse of data and the impact on the environment. But if we can mold the two together by ensuring that we have renewable energy to actually support that compute, well, I think we're onto a winner. And I think AI can play a role in actually delivering that compute in the future in a sustainable and environmental way.
There's been a lot of conversation across the EU recently about the fact that Europe and the EU is so heavily reliant on US tech. We know this. We are home to many US tech companies in Ireland. And one Finnish MEP said, the US could turn off Europe in under an hour. Such is our reliance. Is there any thought, and actually I noted in the executive summary of the strategy that language is not where we are. You say that, interoperability, you're outward looking and looking at that collaborative approach is where Ireland is at. That's always been where we're at, and we've done very well there. But some nations are looking to sovereign AI. If you look at, meetings from France, Australia has sovereign AI. What are your thoughts on it, or where do you think Ireland might position itself?
Yeah, we live in such a codependent world at the moment. Like if the US were to turn off Europe, the counter reaction would turn off the US. Like it's just something that's not going to happen. But I understand people's fears. What it does highlight is the Draghi report from last year highlighted kind of competitiveness within Europe. And what we have seen in the past is an Irish or European company builds up in the first opportunity for VC to come in and purchase it, they go and sell. And there's some exceptions to that, right? Stripe is a good example that I've kind of stuck with it. But I'm pretty sure they've gotten VC funding as well at some stage, or they've been privately backed. But we don't look at the European market as a single market, right? So even there, we speak about France, right? We speak about startups in France, or scale-ups in France, or German scale-ups, or Irish scale-ups, or British scale-ups, or Belarusian scale-ups, whatever it may be, right? We don't actually look at it as one single market. Like it's a bigger market than the US if we were to actually, come together and strategically work together rather than looking at Europe in silos. And I think we need to get to a place where we start looking at, particularly from a market perspective, at Europe as a whole, right? So it's not an Irish company, it's a European company, it's a European scale-up company. And we need to buy from each other, right? So we're really, really bad at buying from one another, and that means that most European companies go to the US to scale up and even to hyperscale rather than actually staying in Europe. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us, particularly in the AI space. And to answer your question directly, Joanne, about developing your own sovereign AI, I'm not sure. Like I'm not sure what the benefits are. Is the juice worth the squeeze? Like the amount of time, effort, money it would cost to develop our own sovereign AI. I'm not sure what we'd be looking to try and achieve, and would it be worth it? I'm not saying I'm completely against it. I'm just not sure what the overall benefits would be. Now the HSE are developing their own LLM. I have developed their own LLM around, would say, contacting them with different questions and queries, etc. As our revenue. And I think there's a place for those types of individual LLMs within the state, but I'm not sure about a sovereign AI. But look, as I said, I'm not against the idea. I'm just not sure what the overall objective would be and what the outcomes would be.
Yeah, I guess people worry about where our data goes, but as somebody who was in tech, there are ways and means to protect our data, within our own country and within our own organizations.
Yeah, well, Revenue actually have their own data center here in Ireland, and that's a very political question. Like, does the Irish state open up? Now, Revenue have, right, but does the Irish state, does government establish our own data centers when there is, let's say, public backlash in certain instances to data centers? There's a wider question around cybersecurity, around defense in general, and I do think we need to spend more on cybersecurity. I do think we need to pay more attention to it, and I've raised this with the government CISO. So, like, I'm not opposed to it, is what I'm saying, but I do think there's a collective EU responsibility here, and I do think just like sometimes we forget how small we are, right? And in comparison to other EU states, like we really need to not just piggyback, but work collectively to really make the biggest impact possible, from my perspective anyway.
So final question, we're coming up to July 1st when Ireland takes over the EU presidency. We've already seen the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach, make sounds about how, we want to make an impact in Europe over the 6-month period, and digital in particular has been flagged as a key priority. What can you say to the presidency and what you might expect?
So from an AI perspective, there will be an AI summit. which will be exciting. It's in October. I don't know the exact date, and it's going to be in the conference center. So that's going to be the convention center. Sorry, I couldn't think of it there. So I think the venue alone, it's modern, it's big, it's going to bring together all of the AI and digital ministers across Europe together. There'll also be some big speakers. I think, we have to be careful as well. Are industry involved or are industry not involved? I think they should be involved in some way, shape, or form, because it's industry that are actually developing, what we're using a lot of the time. So I think that would play a key part. And I do think from my conversations with the Taoiseach and from my conversations with Minister Niamh Smith, digital and AI will play a prominent role, and it has to. The Taoiseach was particularly impressed after the AI summit in Paris last year, and what I would like to see and what I didn't see from Paris was essentially follow through. Like, what are the outcomes and what are we doing after? And that's what I'd really like to hammer home with this AI summit in Ireland, right? So what are we going to do after, right? So these are the 3 objectives that we are going to achieve. So the summit is in October for the last 2 months, and then we hand it over to the next presidency, and they take it from there. I think it's either Cyprus before or after, I can't remember. And that's what I would like to see, just that ambition to kind of just grab it by the horns and run with it. And as I said previously, like, we can be a leader in AI. We have industry here, we have the academics, and we have the expertise. I'm not saying we're going to be competing with the US, but we can fight our own little corner in this part of the world and show the world what we can do.
All right. Well, nice to end on an optimistic note. Although I think overall it's been a very optimistic conversation for sure. AI can, for good, can work its magic in so many ways. But as you started this conversation, governance is key. Deputy Naoise Ó Cearúil, thank you so much for joining me on AI6.
Roger.